Have you ever noticed how often you tell yourself the same story? Once I get through this part, it'll be easier. Maybe after a few more weeks. Maybe after a little more experience. Maybe after you've done it enough times. Whatever it happens to be. Starting a business. Going to the gym. Learning a language. Publishing your work. Getting up early. You don't expect it to feel easy today. But you quietly believe that one day it will. That belief is comforting. It turns today's discomfort into a temporary problem. You tell yourself you're simply paying an entrance fee. Soon you'll reach the part where everything finally starts flowing naturally. Where discipline becomes automatic. Where resistance disappears. Where showing up no longer feels like a decision. It sounds reasonable. The strange part is, many people spend years waiting for that moment. And it never arrives. Think about someone who's been exercising for 10 years. Do you imagine they jump out of bed every morning excited for every workout? Or someone who's written books for 20 years. Do you think they never stare at a blank page? Or a musician who's performed hundreds of times. Do you think they stopped feeling nervous forever? From the outside, it looks like they've reached the easy part. From the inside, their experience is often very different. They still have mornings when they don't feel like starting. They still have moments of doubt. They still negotiate with themselves. The difference isn't that those feelings disappeared. The difference is that they stopped expecting them to. We rarely notice how much of our motivation comes from imagination. We imagine a future version of ourselves who enjoys the work more than we do today. Someone who finally feels confident. Someone who wakes up ready. Someone who no longer has to argue with themselves before they begin. That future version becomes the reward we keep chasing. But what if that isn't what experience gives you? What if experience doesn't replace hesitation? It simply teaches you that hesitation doesn't deserve the final vote. That's a very different kind of progress. Not because the conversation inside your head disappears, but because you slowly stop waiting to win the argument before you act. That's the promise we rarely question. We assume discomfort belongs to beginners. Like training wheels. There's another expectation hiding underneath all of this. We don't just expect things to become easier. We expect ourselves to become a different person. Someone who wakes up motivated. Someone who never hesitates. Someone who doesn't need to convince themselves to begin. So when we still have to pause before starting, it feels like we failed to become who we were supposed to be. Maybe nothing went wrong. Maybe you were simply expecting a version of yourself that never actually exists. Something temporary. A sign that you're still new. So every uncomfortable day feels like evidence that you haven't made it yet. You think, maybe I'm still doing something wrong. Maybe I'm not there yet. Maybe everyone else has figured something out that I haven't. It's an easy conclusion to reach. After all, if progress is real, shouldn't it feel easier by now? Sometimes it does. Many skills become smoother with repetition. You type faster. You drive without thinking. You stop looking at the keyboard. Experience changes things. But that's not the same as saying meaningful work becomes comfortable. Because comfort and familiarity aren't the same thing. Think about people you've admired for years. From a distance, their work often looks effortless. Not because it is. Because you only see what happens after they begin. You don't see the quiet conversation they had with themselves 5 minutes earlier. The moment they almost closed the laptop. The moment they considered skipping today. Effort often becomes invisible long before it disappears. That's where people quietly confuse two very different experiences. You become familiar with the process. You learn what to expect. You stop panicking every time something feels difficult. But difficulty itself doesn't simply disappear. That's why people often become confused by their own progress. They expected practice to remove the discomfort. Instead, practice mostly removes the surprise. You stop being shocked that beginning feels difficult. You stop interpreting that feeling as evidence that you're in the wrong place. It's still there. It just no longer decides what you do next. Think about the first time you spoke in front of a group of people. Your heart probably raced. Your hands felt awkward. Every second felt painfully long. Years later, your heart might still beat a little faster before speaking. The difference is that now you recognize the feeling. It no longer surprises you. You don't immediately interpret it as proof that you're incapable. You simply think, this is how it feels before I begin. The feeling stayed surprisingly similar. The meaning completely changed. That's something we rarely notice. We're so focused on changing the feeling that we never consider changing our interpretation of it. Every uncomfortable emotion immediately becomes a question. How do I get rid of this? Instead of another question that's often much more useful. What if this feeling isn't a problem at all? Not because discomfort is enjoyable, and not because struggle is something to celebrate, but because some feelings were never meant to disappear, only to become familiar. People often quit for a reason they never realize. Not because the work stayed difficult, because reality broke a promise they believed. They expected the difficult part to end. So every uncomfortable day felt like evidence that something had gone wrong. Why does this still feel hard? Shouldn't I be past this by now? Without noticing it, they weren't measuring progress. They were measuring comfort. And those aren't the same thing. That's why two people can have almost identical experiences and reach completely different conclusions. One person finishes a long day and thinks, I still didn't feel like doing it. The other finishes the exact same day and thinks, I showed up anyway. The discomfort was almost identical. The story wasn't. One person sees discomfort as proof they're stuck. The other sees it as part of the process. Eventually, something quiet begins to happen. You stop asking, when will this become easy? Because you slowly realize that was never the right question. The better question becomes, can I stop treating discomfort like bad news? Because every meaningful part of life asks something from you. Responsibility, uncertainty, patience, effort. Not once, repeatedly. There isn't a version where those things disappear forever. There is only a version where they stop surprising you. Maybe that's why so many people spend years waiting for a feeling, instead of noticing they've already changed. Not because they finally reached the easy part, but because they no longer need the easy part to continue. Maybe that's why waiting for the easy part can become its own kind of distraction. Every difficult day feels temporary. Every uncomfortable moment feels like something you're supposed to outgrow. So instead of accepting today's experience, you keep comparing it to an imaginary future that never arrives. And reality keeps disappointing an expectation it never promised. Because maybe the easy part was never waiting somewhere in the future. Maybe it was only an idea, a quiet promise you kept measuring yourself against. And once that promise disappears, you stop asking why this still feels hard. You stop treating every difficult day as a sign that you're behind. And you begin to understand something much quieter. Progress doesn't always feel like ease. Sometimes it just feels like continuing, without needing ease to arrive.